Practice, Polish, and Publish. And we are very fortunate to have with us Jamie Edelson Goldstein, who will be leading us in the session this afternoon. And if you read the opening chat pod, and I'm sure she'll share a little bit more, Jamie is joining us today from Singapore. So welcome from miles away, Jamie. This afternoon with you are myself, Cherise Moore, and I'm a senior researcher at CalPro, and Barbara Carruthers, who is a research associate at CalPro, and we are here to help make sure that this webinar goes off without a hitch. And so if anything comes up throughout the presentation that you need help with, please let us know through the chat pod. The purpose of our webinars are to really have instructors get together in a real-time live format to discuss issues that are key to your success in the classrooms. It was started in 2010, where we really wanted to be able to convene practitioners from across the state to highlight exemplary instructional practices. I'm going to turn this part of the
back over to host Cherise Moore. Thanks a lot.
Great. Thank you, Barb. And as we continue, I want to say welcome to those of you who have just joined us, and we are just starting. The session again is the ESL writing process, practice, polish, and publish. Jamie Edelson Goldstein is our facilitator for this session today, and in her session there are several objectives that we'll be covering. You will be learning about developing a meaningful writing lesson, objective, and prompt. You'll be learning about integrating the writing process elements within a writing lesson. And finally, you'll be learning about implementing feedback tips to streamline instructional revisions. And this is an information-filled presentation, and I know that you will have questions throughout. And so we do have a Q&A chat pod that will be opening up towards the end of the session, and we'll allow some time at that point for a discussion. I'm going to turn it over to Jamie now and allow her to begin. And Jamie, please take it away.
Thanks so much. I hope you can all hear me. If you can, would you give me a little green check to let me know? Because you know we've got that Singapore distance thing going. Great, I can see that definitely. Sonia, just so you know, you're raising, yeah, there you go. The raising hand creates a little notification to me that says someone is in need of help. So if you can, try to stick with the green check, because it allows me then to really to focus on our webinar. Sorry, it is 6:07 this morning, and so I'm trying to be as articulate as possible. We have a lovely group of people, which means that the chats are going to be rather dense. I wanted to show you our... Barb, I'm having a little difficulty getting the pod with the poll. There it goes. I just wanted to let you all see what you think that what you feel like this morning, and those of you that didn't have a chance to vote. You can see what text identity you feel like. I can tell you that I personally have the to-do list identity going on, but Deborah added that she was a love note, and I thought that was just wonderful. So may we all be love notes by the end of our session today. I'd like to do a little connecting first to find out who we are, what the needs of the group are, because in this kind of situation, there are a lot of different levels at work, a lot of different needs at work, just as we have in our classes. And so as much as possible, I'll try to customize. But I also would like to let you know that at the end of the webinar, you'll get a link to a You Send It, and you can also download things from the webinar itself. If there are questions that we're not able to answer today, and by we, I mean me, then I'd be very happy to email you responses, and Barb and Cherise have the email list, so you don't actually even need to give me your email. You just need to let me know your name next to the question. Do you see that? I hope you see, I shouldn't ask a yes/no question, the Q&A chat pod at the bottom. That's where you would be able to type in a question, and I'll see that there. That would be a question that you are happy to have answered towards the end of the session. Okay, so let's see what we look like. The majority of us today are intermediate, teachers of intermediate students, but oh, no, looks like it's getting neck and neck now. We've got advanced, and we have ASC and ABE, as well as a healthy component of ESL beginning learners in our midst. Not that you are in our midst. Oh, brother. Time change. Okay. So let's look at the next connecting that I would like to do. How about how much time per week do your learners spend writing in class, would you say? We're really going to be looking at writing as something that we want to integrate as often in the class as possible. Okay, so I'm going to show you what it looks like now. It looks like the majority are within the 5 to 30 minute range. Oh, we have several that are devoting an hour. So what we're going to be talking about today is going to encompass everything from a 2 to 3 minute quick write all the way to an hour-long process of drafting and feedback and revising. In some cases, you may even have a revision going on for an hour in the classroom. And these are all, writing is not a one-stop shop. We need to be writing in the same way that we teach any skill in our classes, where we are cycling and revisiting and allowing the students time to do extensive work and intensive work. So it's not rocket science in a way. It's what we already know how to do. It's just maybe reminding ourselves of some of the techniques. Okay, so now I'd like to know which of our 3 objectives today are most important to you. Looks like we're getting a pretty even split. I'll show you. You can't get more even than that. Oh, no, it's changing. Okay, so it looks like I chose the objectives somewhat sensibly. You can never know when you're choosing objectives from afar. If you'd all decided that you wanted to do writing prompts, then we would have focused more on that. But we will pretty much be taking care of each of these today. And let's see. Okay, so we're going to go now to a little background, just get right into it. There's a little bit of a transition time, so hold on to your hats. Here we go. Now on this layout, I don't have a question pod for you, just because I want you to be able to see the PowerPoint slides really clearly. So feel free to put your questions right in the chat pod to the right. So I titled this Practice, Polish, Publish because I don't think we need to work as much on our presentation of writing as we need to allow our students to practice writing. So we're going to talk about what we can do to get our students into practicing and polishing and then hopefully publishing, and we'll be looking at that through the lens of the writing process. But I thought perhaps first, since we are, of course, very evidence-based, research-based, I'd like you to take a look at the model standards, not model standards, wrong year, the Common Core Standards definition of writing. And now I'd like you to think, what would you add to this? Go ahead and write your additions in the chat pod. What language would you put in? And as you're typing, I know some of you are not. Oh, April, yes, there will be access. This is recorded, so you have access to the material. I don't believe you actually have access to the PowerPoint, but Barb or Charisse can answer that question. I mean, the PowerPoint is on the recording. Okay, so Jennifer's added using the correct register and correct English grammar. And Lorena has talked about influencing, persuading, and conveying, and Marcia's talking about grammar and accuracy and illustrating. So we're coming at this very much from a language teacher, English teacher's point of view. I think it's worth looking at this to realize what the focus will be on the assessment of our learners' writing. And I think the point that I would make is clear and sometimes unfamiliar audience. So that does go to register, that does go to different genres of writing, and it also goes to a level of vocabulary that the learner needs to use in order to be clear. So what the second language writing instruction research tells us is that writing instruction needs to be explicit, meaning that we are specifically targeting writing. We're not saying we're going to write some sentences about this grammar structure, or we're going to write our dialogue out after we've said it. No, this is about explicit instruction in writing, so that we are saying now you are really focusing on your writing skills. And then it's also direct in that we are giving them direct instruction in the strategies they need. This goes to giving them frames. This goes to showing how to deal with register, how different genres are organized. So it's a very direct form of instruction. We have in the past, both with writing, certainly with speaking, and definitely with vocabulary, had this attitude of we'll let it wash over the learner, and the learner will pick up what he or she needs by having the gestalt of writing flowing through them. And it's just not true. We need the direct instruction. And we also need a systematic form of instruction. And the writing process is something that allows us to move through writing instruction very systematically. If you really want a great view of the writing process, I highly, highly encourage you to do the CalPro writing workshop. Rana Meji's done. Rana, write your co-facilitator's name, please. I've lost it. And Tony, I'm sorry that my voice is going in and out. That may be a connection issue from your server. Will you take a minute and just read this, because I think this is, we've now talked about the research element of direct and explicit and systematic, but this is actually the affective side of reading. Thank you, Rana. Guillermo. So Rana and Guillermo have done a fantastic job of putting together a very fleshed out training on writing. So for me, the other aspect of writing is that it's our learners' voices that we get to hear in a up close and personal, and it's an opportunity for them to share their identity through writing. So I think we can't ignore the importance of that. This is the Common Core's concept of what we need to be teaching in writing. Now remember that Common Core hasn't gone for English language learners 100%. They haven't worked on the accommodations, but I think we know this is what's coming our way, and I think it's worth knowing that our students are going to be asked to be offering and supporting opinions, demonstrating understanding of the subjects they're studying, and conveying real and imagined experiences and events. So this is the type of writing that we need to be introducing. And we need to be introducing an academic strand to that writing, also a workplace strand. So we know that the learners are going to be, will be needing to adapt the form and content of their writing to a particular task. So we are not, goes to the register, it goes to the genre again. And I thought this second bullet was really interesting because this is, of course, an academic skill to be able to build knowledge on a subject through research projects. This is project-based learning, task-based learning, so this allows us to integrate all the skills in a writing project. Analysis and significant time and effort in writing. Okay, I'm just checking in on my technology. Okay. And then we want to make sure that we devote the significant time and effort to writing. That means that we are not giving writing 5 minutes a week. We are, just as we're doing now with reading and vocabulary, we are providing students with significant amounts of time to do this work. So research also tells us that these 3 elements are key to learners succeeding. They have to have an understanding of the topic on which they're writing. They have to have sufficient vocabulary with which to work. And they have to have an understanding of the organization of the writing task or genre with which they're working. But we also know that in an ESL classroom, it's not necessarily possible to do independent writing at all times. And so Gibbons came up with a process, a way to adapt it to a curricular cycle. This was primarily for secondary, but it, I think, translates very well into our classrooms. You spend time in class on a lesson standpoint. You spend time building up the field. Oh, Tom, the question about register. Register, I'm taking a little side path. Register is the, tone isn't the right expression, but it's a way that you would write to a friend versus a way that you would write an email to a business associate versus the way that you would write a research paper versus the way that you would write a short composition describing your best friend in an ESL classroom. So the register, it's the same as you have in speaking. The register requires different vocabulary, different structure, and we need to be able to degree of formality. Very nice, Catherine. So as you see these four areas here, this actually doesn't go to independent writing until the very end. So the group works together on building up the board, meaning, working on the students' schema and ideas, getting information in front of them through brainstorming, through shared experience, modeling the type of writing that you're going to do, again, with the whole class, having the class construct off the model as a group, and then going to independent writing. So that's Gibbons' concept of the way we can adapt the writing process in the classroom. Essentially doing the first 3 stages of writing, pre-writing, writing a draft, giving some feedback, doing those as a whole class, and then enlisting the student again in the writing process for independent writing. I agree with you, Deborah. Modeling is critical. So I think I wanted to share this with you because this construction to me is very Singaporean. It shows how long I've been here for the last 3.5 weeks. So instead of just saying, what can learners write, I wrote, what can learners be writing? So I just thought this was funny, and I left it there for you so you can see that I have been affected by Singlish. This Venn diagram, which is very small for you, and I'm going to blow it up in a minute, is a demonstration of the genres that the students find at home, what they find at school, and then the genres identified by Chapman and King as common writing genres. And where they intersect here, you can see all the possibilities for writing that we have available to us. And so it's not just a matter of composition, and especially for those of you that are teaching beginning level, we of course want to start with the type of writing that our students see most often so that they in turn are getting input before they have output. So how do we select writing tasks for classes with learners of varying interests and writing proficiency? How can we do that? I'm going to put up a new chat pod and ask you to just spend a minute. Let me put up this new pod. Hold on, it's being a little persnickety. So I'm going to just ask you to think for a moment and share in this chat pod. I'll actually put up 2 chat pods so the people with a first name starting from A to S, no, A to L, you'll work in chat pod 1, and then M through Z in chat pod 2. And I'd like you to tell me how do you select your writing tasks? What sources do you go to for your writing tasks based on your different learners' needs? So participants A through L, you're in here, and participants M, and we're going by first names.
Jamie, are you speaking right now? We don't have your audio.
And
There you are.
is that better?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay. All right. Sorry about that, guys. So condensing what I just said, in writing, the four elements of an effective objective are three of them are available to you just by virtue of the fact that you're doing writing. You've got the skill focus, you have the communication task, and you have the assessment. What you don't automatically have is context. So I'd like you to take a look at these and tell me, what do you think is missing? Go ahead and type it in the chat pod. I could sing you the Jeopardy theme song while we wait. Do 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 do. The main idea. Okay, is there another way that we could? Yes, the topic, context. What's the context? We have a note to a child's teacher, but in what situation? So when you're writing objectives, you want to try to be as specific as possible, because in fact that will help you plan your pre-writing for the learner. Exactly. 5 sentences about what? So very often when you're looking at your objectives for your lesson plan, there's a tendency to be less specific, and then you're caught because you don't know what vocabulary to prepare, or you don't know what models to find, and the students also get caught because there's not that beautiful scaffolding that occurs when we provide context. In the product mindset of the 20th century, we were very interested in outcome, not as interested in process. The 21st century doesn't deny the importance of outcomes, but it highlights the importance of process to get to those outcomes. And the process-based approach to writing is, in fact, writing instruction. So if, and Gabrielato has talked a lot about this, I've given you his article at the end, but if we show the students the process of writing, that it isn't a one-shot, you write, you're done, that you write, you get feedback, you revise, you research a little more, you revise. We all know that that's part of the writing process, but in the academic world, or in the schoolroom, in the classroom, students often feel like they need to be able to write and write correctly the first time. So the writing process is a very important aspect of the writing lesson. And you see these steps here. Oops. Our little guy will come in again. We need to take the learner through each of these stages of the writing process. And in some cases, we have to go back down. So we start from pre-writing, where we build schema, we teach the organization of the genre, we help the learner get the vocabulary that would be most important key, we provide sentence frames. Then we have the learner write, but this is a draft, and the concept of draft is very much implanted in the process. Wouldn't you agree, Rana? Drafting is key. Then we have the feedback and the editing and the revision stage, where students are giving each other feedback. Students are editing their own work. Then they're revising their work for a second draft. And at that point, they may finalize it and do some sort of publishing. And by publishing, I mean that it becomes part of the class, either through a project or on a board or sent online, emailed. There's all different ways to publish, and we'll talk about that in a sec. But these stages are so important, and the learner needs to be clued into these stages. We don't keep it a secret. In our WAPIA model, which is how so many of us work, it's a one-day setup for a lesson. So writing it needs to be shorter so that we can get through. In the warm-up review, you're working with the schema and vocabulary. In the introduction, you're identifying the prompt. In the presentation, you're working with a writing model and helping students identify the organization of the writing. In the guided practice, they're doing the first draft. In the communicative practice, this is when they're doing peer editing. They're looking at each other's work with a checklist using guiding questions. And in the evaluation, they're doing their own editing. And the application is their second draft handed in. This is really for short pieces of writing. If you want to have the students do extended writing, then you want to look at a task-based model where you conduct pre-writing activities as a priming. You prepare them with working with the writing model, and this is all on day 1. So in task-based, we don't focus on form initially. We focus on form after the students have had a chance to practice and we've identified where the gaps are. So on day 1, students have worked on the first draft and some of the editing. On day 2, you're building the board again to help the students recall what they did last time. By building the board, I mean you're working with the students in brainstorming, visuals, other types of input to help solidify the concepts that you presented the day before. You conduct a whole class or group edit on a mock-up of something that you saw, like a combination of the student drafts. Then you provide them time to revise and draft again. The focus on form becomes it's on them at this point. Now they have to look at the checklists and revise, and then you have them handing in a second draft where your feedback comes in. I've put this in here. We're not really going to stare at it for too long, but I want you to know that I've provided you with this in the handout. I think when you are looking at your lesson and you're thinking about how you're writing, you need to be conscious of which steps you have in the lesson process. So here are a series of guided questions. Oh, Heidi, I'm so glad to have given you an epiphany. Here are a series of guiding questions so that when you're looking at your lesson, you can see that you've really covered. It's your checklist in essence. It's your editing checklist. So let me ask you to reflect on a minute. What's the benefit of contextualizing the writing prompt? And while you're thinking about that, okay, Deborah has pointed out that peer editing is not very successful in some cases. Peer editing takes time. Peer editing is something that you want to target very specifically what the learners are looking for in each other's work. I tend to like to start from a content standpoint, not a grammatical standpoint, not a vocabulary standpoint. Was the story, was the paragraph, were the series of sentences comprehensible to the reader? Because I think that if we have that, I think the learners can absolutely say yay or nay to that. And they can give suggestions to each other about how to make something clearer or more interesting. I like to use the self-editing checklist for the first round for the student, for them to check punctuation and that kind of thing. But my experience has been that on the mechanics, it's really better to do whole class awareness with a group edit than self-awareness with the student doing his own edit. And then after they've had a few times of practicing on their own work and a large group, then they can often go to a peer editing. Okay, let's take a moment and look at some ways to work with writing, the practice side. The next 10 minutes we're going to talk about the practice, the polish, and the publish. While we wait for this to come up. So with the practice, the pre-writing and drafting, you have this list in your handout. And we want to make, it looks like it's got cut off a little bit, but there is a whole series of bullets for sequencing and organizing. There are more activities in heaven and hell than you can ever imagine for pre-writing. And It really can be a trap at times, just like we used to get stuck in warm-up and review. You can spend, if you have 2.5 hours and you're going to give 90 minutes to your writing lesson, you can end up spending 45, 50 minutes in pre-writing. And that's why I think the task-based approach is so helpful, because you can recognize that this may be a 2-day process. But I can't stress enough how important this is, because this is where the learners really get all the information that then supports them, the direct instruction that supports them in the writing. Heidi Spruck-Wrigley has a wonderful presentation on using picture stories, but one of the things she says that I think is so important is that when you're choosing your pictures, choose a picture that has a lot of potential for exploitation from a vocabulary standpoint, just from language, emotive. So a picture like this can provide you with a lot of prompts for writing, and will also generate a lot of language on the part of the students. Think about using a social, Ruth, it's at the end of the webinar, you'll get it. Think about using social vocabulary learning strategies. Writing the words up on the board that are key to the topic and that the students will be wanting to use. You can certainly do that. You can go over them. But why not start with a chart that gives the students the lists of words that they're going to be needing to write their composition or their sentences. So this is from an essay on body art. And I knew that they were going to be working with this language. Some of it is the academic phrasing that they're going to be using. Some of it is actual vocabulary that they need. And so by using this social vocabulary learning strategy, I can more quickly identify the prompts. I'm sorry, I just read the chat pod. I can more quickly identify the gaps. Kate Kinsella is the queen of frames. I highly recommend going to her website and looking at all the frames that she suggests for academic language. Right now, she's very high on academic language and speaking, but for a long time, she used it with writing as well. A frame is a wonderful way to help the learner see the structure of the writing that you're going to have them do, but they're filling in content. They're not filling in the structure, and that helps them to analyze. This is an example of guided writing using a writing model. It's quite complex. I would not recommend this for a beginning level, even a low intermediate, but this is definitely something that higher level learners can make use of. And again, as you can see, it's going towards Common Core with the very academic approach. This is an example of a model that I used. I provided the students with an About Me reading, 2 About Me readings. They had an A and a B, so it was a jigsaw. They had questions that they asked and answered, but in the course of doing all of this review of the model, they were of course preparing to write their own. So the pre-writing is where you can integrate the other skills in your lesson, so that when you are fully engaged in the writing aspect of it, you don't feel guilty that you've left out reading, writing, and speaking. I mean, reading, listening, and speaking. So that's one way to look at the practice aspect, the preparation for the writing. Let's get to the writing itself. But, well, actually, we're going to get to the polishing of the writing. I can't really spend time with you here where we're going to look at students writing, because that's a little bit like watching paint dry. But let's take it from the standpoint that we've done the pre-writing, we've assigned the prompt, the students have written their first draft. This is talking about the importance of self-editing and the idea that learner awareness of error is really the first step. You know, we can't pronounce things correctly unless we're aware of the sounds. We can't do a good job of writing unless we can't do a good job of accurate structure unless we're aware of what the accurate structure is. So self-editing with a checklist really helps our learners see where their edits are needed, where their errors are. And I think as teachers, it's very tempting for us to just go in with our purple pens because we're kinder than red. But if the student has to find it first, and the student has to locate the error in order to pay attention to it. But we have to target which errors they should look for, and the checklist will do that. When you are asking the students to edit their work, you're really engaging their metacognitive skills. So before you ever have them edit their own, have them edit samples. And then, again, the editing checklists. Here's Susan Gare. This is an example of a writing checklist for beginning level. Here's one a step up. And notice that even in the checklist, the student is getting a little more language. Here's a higher level one. You can also consider having them record their writing. I know that I find this very helpful. I'm quite auditory, and so when I write something, I can't necessarily find the errors, but as soon as I start to read it aloud, that works for me. This is going to be something that's probably going to be more effective at a higher level because beginning level learners may not be able to hear the errors. If your students are able to type, definitely you want to get them doing that because then you have the beauty of the Word doc underlining all their errors. So our role in providing meaningful feedback to our students is to first face our fears of what that means. So we really need to understand that we're not correcting every error. And this list, I'm not going to go over this bulleted list with you. You have it in the handout. But we know that we have to give direct instruction in the errors. We just don't have to give direct instruction in every error. We target a particular language point, a particular grammar structure that we want to work with. If we're working on word choice, that's what we correct for. If we're working on making sure that it's clear, the timing that's going on, the tense structure, that's clear, that's what we work on. And Kate Kinsella also has the idea of refraining from extensive writing on the learner's drafts. Now, here are some different ways to summarize the errors. You can write it out to the learner. You can mark it. Oops, sorry. You can mark it with code, or you can underline and circle. You know, this is, again, not rocket science, but being aware that your students need to be aware of what your symbols mean. If you put in the correction, you should know that the student will more than likely not pick it up. If the student writes the correction, there's a likelihood that the student may pick up the correction. But if you write it in there, it's a one-time look, and it's not necessarily going to get sticky in any way, shape, or form. If you do it for the first part, the first paragraph, the first sentence, and then have the student continue to follow through on your corrections, then there's a possibility that that would be more effective. You have this in your handout. It's way too small, but I gave you a list of correction symbols because I think it's it's enjoyable. Where did the people get the idea that red is cruel? Well, the reason that people got the idea that red is cruel is from years and years of having papers turned back to you covered in red. So it isn't so much, red is perfectly fine. It's just that you want to make use of it sparingly. Okay, let's go to publishing. Publishing is pretty short, and then we'll get to your questions. But publishing is really important. Yes, Jane, a paper covered in purple is not good either. The whole issue here is not about which color is cruel, but it is the concept of covering a paper in error correction. So the concept is target. So one of the ways that you can publish your students' work is to start a class wiki and make sure that students are able to put their work in the wiki. Or if you have a web page at your school, that's a great place to publish their writing. This is an example from Barry Bakeen. He's got different colors for each student who's written. So they've basically done sort of a round table writing on how to learn English. This is a list of project-based learning that has a writing focus. I'm sure they're quite self-explanatory, except perhaps for Friendship Quilt. And Friendship Quilt is where students take a piece of canvas or muslin and they write a poem or some other short form of writing that they have done in class. They can use fabric markers, and then the class puts it together. You can also put that together as a story quilt, and that's really a lot of fun. You can do this with paper as well. It doesn't have to be fabric, but it's quite wonderful. Rana, in the early years of our teaching, Rana showed me the concept of a city on a wall, and that took me to the idea of having students create murals, but the mural would be a graffiti wall. So the students could actually write pertinent sentences about things that are happening in the day. For example, we've had these terrible situations throughout the world, so they could send messages of peace or messages of solace, and this could become a mural that could go up for a short time around the school. I see we're really still into the feedback aspect. That's always where we get caught as teachers. But of course, that's where we're one-on-one with the student. The last point of publication I'd like to make with you is the idea that there are these wonderful resources both in print and on the web. I'm pointing out Easy English Times, but there are others, and they accept student writing. So you could have the students write with the idea of publishing in one of these ESL journals. And there are several of them around. You just have to Google ESL online journal or ESL online newsletter. And they also can write responses to blogs. So what we have to remember is that the bottom line on writing is that it's a form of communication. It connects really strongly to our learners' identities. And especially at this time, with the advocacy for adult education at an all-time high and adult education situation at an all-time low, our learners can be writing all kinds of pieces about what adult education and ESL instruction has meant to them, what it has done for them. They can research and write about the statistics of the closing adult schools, and they can send that material, they can publish it off to their their legislators. So I'd like to make sure that we have plenty of time for questions, and if I can just share with you one other thing that's in the handout. You can create a rubric for learners that allows you to do a little less on the page and a little more with just letting the learners know how well they did in general on their writing. And they can continually, they can put this in a portfolio and adjust their, they can continue to work on developing and evolving as writers. San Diego Community College has a wonderful rubric for writing for different levels, and I've given that to you in the handout. The handouts are coming up. Everyone is anxious for the handout. Okay, I just need to see about the publishing comment. What does publishing do for learners? No, not at all. It's not intimidating at all. So Heidi wants to know about the publishing aspect. Okay, I just want you to cast your minds back to 5th grade, an open house. And when you came into the classroom with your parents, if this is part of your background, and your paper was on the board, that's what we're talking about. It's the ability to have students work. It's the ability of the teacher to provide a greater sense of gravitas to what you're doing in the classroom. So it's an opportunity for others to read what the student has written. It's an opportunity for the student to say, here I am. And of course, you're not going to publish anything a student doesn't want to have published. Okay, let's see the questions. It doesn't look like anyone has written any questions. So why don't I take some questions now from you? Sharice, are you coming back on?
I am ready when you are.
Okay. How about if I hand over in two? We'll see if